Yeah. So remember, Dr. Chadden doesn't like us to have the chat on, and she likes everyone's cameras to be on. So if your camera isn't on, please turn it on. And then also, if your microphone is on, please mute it so it doesn't, give us feedback or anything like that. And yeah, so save all your questions until the end. There's going to be like a time for that. So yeah, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tom.
Okay, can you all hear me? All right, well, it's great to be here speaking at Zoom University. I mean, Arizona State University, especially in my brother's class. And yeah, it was a pretty open speaking topic, so I'm just gonna talk about a few things that I found useful from my career, and yeah, hopefully we can have plenty of time to chat and answer questions after. Let's see, I'm gonna share my screen. Where is it again, Will? I'm used to Google Hangouts.
It's the green share screen button at the bottom.
Oh, yeah, there we go. And present. Okay, is this working? All right, so yeah, this is just called some heuristics for life. Do you all know what a heuristic is? It's you'll hear this a lot. It's kind of like when people ask you how something works, especially in computer science, they'll be like heuristics, and it's like this cop out answer. Um, and really, what it means is that there are some games that are solved, right? Like chess and checkers are solved games, right? Like for any given board position, there is an exact right answer. Like the entire game can be modeled, and there is a right best solution for any given situation. But life is a very complicated game, right? It's like Go, and it's such a complicated game that you can't actually model it or solve it completely. So if you can't solve the problem, you have to rely on heuristics, which is sort of like an approximation. And often, I'm sure there are all these heuristics from life you already know, like you hear them from like your grandparents a lot, like rules of thumb, right? Like a penny saved is a penny earned, and this is just like a heuristic, right? Like there are exceptions to heuristics. It's not they're just sort of rules of thumb that in general tend to be helpful or true. So what I want to do in this talk is talk a little bit about my career as someone who's not too much older than you, and offer a little bit of the lessons I've learned, and then we can chat about whatever you want about what it's like to be, early to mid-career in tech and in engineering, school, grad school, whatever you all would find useful. So there are caveats to learning from my story, right? The first one is that n equals 1. So you can simulate life many times and sample, right? There are like 6 billion people on Earth, and everyone's experience has been different. So when I tell you about my experience, that's just a sample of one, right? So it's definitely not statistically significant, but hopefully it's still helpful for you all. Also, you can't control for time. So my experience, right? I'm 30 now, so I'm older than you all, and the world's different today than it was when I was in college. So the world has changed. So everything that I talk about probably isn't going to apply exactly. And third, like I'm not you all, so my goals, values, and preferences are different than your all's, and that means that you all may have a different optimal solution that you would work towards instead of me, and that's totally okay. Another thing about this, you can't control for time. I think it's I can't remember who it is, but someone says like the only books worth reading are biographies. And I think biographies are really useful to read because they're like case studies in life, right? But most biographies are about like really old white men, and when someone's only 30, right? That's like actually really useful to hear about their experience because it's the most close to you as like young students, but they don't write biographies about young people. So I think it can be useful to give you a little case study on my life as someone who's more recently out of school and working in the engineering field. All right, so here's like my career overview. So yeah, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. That's where Will and I are from. I moved away in 2008 to go to college at Duke University in North Carolina. And I double majored in biomedical engineering and electrical and computer engineering. And when I was at Duke, I thought I wanted to be pre-med like so many students, but got really interested in research and was exposed to like all these industries and careers that don't exist in Kentucky, like finance and tech, and realized that you can actually have, I think based on my preferences and values, like a much better or interesting career than just like doing surgery or something in medicine. And you can actually make a lot of money in these things. Like in Kentucky, probably the highest paying career is being a medical doctor, but you can make even more than doctors in finance and tech. And, you know, growing up in Kentucky, I didn't really know that. So once it was really good for me to leave the state and see all these other career paths. And once I learned about them, I just realized medicine wasn't the best field for me. So I dropped that and really did a lot of research and was really interested in going to graduate school. But I knew I didn't want to go straight into graduate school. So I ended up getting this scholarship from the Air Force called the SMART Scholarship. And it's sort of like a ROTC for nerds. So it's like trying to get top tech talent and engineering talent to come work for the government and the civil service. And so that paid for half of Duke. And in return, I had a one-to-one payback period. So I went and worked for the Air Force for 2 years because they paid for 2 years at Duke. So in 2012, I graduated and I moved to Boston, and I was assigned to Hanscom Field, which is where MIT Lincoln Labs is. So a lot of the really advanced procurements and research and development groups for the Air Force are based up there, and they issue contracts to MIT to build things like satellites and sensors and radar arrays and things like this. So I was essentially like a program manager for these contracts that were issued to, I had one that went to MIT and one that went to Raytheon, and they were building this new satellite system that had to, the satellite system was going to be used to connect the president's football. So the president has this like briefcase that has all the nuclear codes, and that has to, in the case of nuclear war, that's what's used to relay like launch codes to silos and submarines and bombers. And what's really interesting about this satellite system is it has to operate through nuclear war. So like if Russia sent nukes to the US, right, like you need to be able to guarantee that the US can still launch nukes back as part of like nuclear deterrence. So this system had to operate through a nuclear environment, which is like a really intense, interesting environment. And there's something called EMP, like electromagnetic pulse, that's generated whenever a nuclear warhead explodes in the upper atmosphere. So there was some interesting atmospheric and plasma physics about how you can make electronics that operate through this very, very harsh environment. So I was doing research and managing contracts around how you would develop satellites and electronics that can survive that sort of environment. So I did that for 2 years, and then always knew I wanted to go back to grad school and do a PhD. So after 2 years working, the time was right. And so I applied to a bunch of different programs and ended up deciding to stay in Boston and go to Harvard to do my PhD in applied physics. And I applied to a lot of different programs, and I was really just focused on, you may not know this, I didn't really know it coming straight out of undergrad, but it doesn't really, you don't have to, like if you want to get a PhD in physics, it doesn't mean you had to be an undergrad major in physics. And if you want to get a PhD in mechanical engineering, it doesn't mean you had to be an undergrad in mechanical engineering. You can switch, and it really just depends on what's exciting and which department is the advisor in that who you want to work for. So I really wanted to work for this guy named Charles Lieber at Harvard. He was chair of the chemistry department, but he had a joint appointment in the applied physics program. So I was, as an engineer in college, especially electrical engineering, I had most of the prerequisites necessary to do a PhD in applied physics. So I applied through that program to work directly with him, and was accepted. And that research was what I was most excited about. But for example, I also applied to like MIT to get a PhD in rocket science through their Aero Astro program. I applied to biomedical engineering PhD at Brown. So so yeah, I'm just saying this to let you know that you're not pigeonholed by what you major in college. Or you have plenty of options for grad school if that's what you want to do. So I worked for Charlie Lieber at Harvard for 4 years, 9 months. And my research was on nanoelectronics applied to neuroscience. So we were growing these very, very tiny semiconductor sensors, and I could inject these sensors through a syringe into the brain. So I'd basically give a shot, like a vaccine, to a mouse brain, and then I could plug the mouse into my computer, and it would become like a computer mouse, and I could like read its brain waves on a computer monitor. So it's very similar to the type of work that Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink right now. And I graduated in 4 years, 9 months, and decided I did not want to be an academic, and I didn't actually really like neuroscience very much. So I ended up applying to a lot of places, including management consulting, excuse me, management consulting, like quantitative finance roles on Wall Street, and a bunch of jobs in the tech industry. And probably the most unique opportunity was to go work at Google X on their new projects team. I didn't actually even apply for the job. I was introduced to my current boss through a mutual friend from Harvard. And this team is basically like 8 PhD physicists who just vet new technologies for Google and decide what's really promising, and what should Google invest in, and how could you build a huge new business around those technologies. So it's a really interesting mix of like financial modeling, technical de-risking, and hard science, and like program management, trying to think creatively around like really cutting edge technologies coming out of universities or Google R&D, and thinking like trying to connect the dots around how you could monetize it and build a business around it. And so I've been there since August 2019, and am still working there, although they closed the office for at least the next year. So I actually relocated to Kentucky, and I'm working fully remote now. So now I want to talk about, I have 5 heuristics that I've found valuable in my career so far, and I just want to go through each one by one and maybe give a little anecdote about it, and then that's it, and we can just have a Q&A and discussion. So the first thing that I found really, really valuable that no one ever told me is, I found it really important to maximize for optionality. So, the example of this for myself is, I double majored in electrical engineering and biomedical engineering at college. And biomedical engineering is really about, it's about one vertical, right? It's about healthcare and applying these like general skills and principles from engineering and science to specifically to the life sciences and healthcare. So that's like a little bit niche and limiting, to be honest. Whereas electrical engineering is more about a very general skill set, right? It's about electromagnetics and physics, and basically everything uses electrical engineering skills now. So when I came out of college, I had many options, but it was almost all because of my electrical engineering degree. The biomedical engineering degree was kind of a nice complement if I really wanted to work in healthcare or the life sciences. But on its own, if I had just majored in biomedical engineering, I would have been sort of pigeonholed within biomedical engineering. To be honest, there aren't even that many jobs specific to that you can get straight out of undergrad with a biomedical engineering degree. Some people think going into college, if you major in BME from especially a top program, you can like go to Medtronic and get a job working on medical devices. But if you think about like a pacemaker, right? For the junior engineering roles, they want people with specific skills to contribute to that device. So they need like electrical engineers to do the circuitry, and mechanical engineers to work on the housing and the mechanics of the device. The people who have the subject matter expertise that's relevant to like medical devices and medicine, like these are people who have advanced degrees, right? Like they're going to rely on like an undergrad, someone straight out of undergrad to like tell them how cardiac physiology works or something and design the device, right? So and it's not just true of these. I think it's true of a lot of things. Like the more, and if you were to major in something like nursing, right, there are a lot of like hurdles and certifications, and it's a very defined process. Same with like medicine, like anything like that. If you really know you want to do that, then that's great. But if you decide if you aren't so sure, then it's going to be hard for you to sort of pivot and take advantage of these opportunities that you don't know about, right? So for Google X, for example, like the new projects team vets technologies from all fields. So they actually really liked that I had this relatively general skill set that was applied physics and electrical engineering, so I could work through problems from a lot of different fields. I wasn't super niche. The second heuristic is just to be super rational, scientific, and data driven in everything you do. So like think about when you do an engineering problem set, you might spend like hours working on a problem set, sometimes like more than an hour on a single problem or something. I mean, basically this is like a simulated environment, right? Like working on homework problems or a test problem for a grade. It's like, it may seem really important to you right now, but honestly, like the stakes will never be lower. So if you're doing something like deciding to go to a graduate program or deciding what job to take or deciding to buy a home, like that's when it's more important than ever to like apply these analytical skills that you have to make a decision that could have a huge impact on your life, like certainly a much bigger impact than some homework problem. Yet most people don't actually do it, right? They spend more time on one homework problem than they do like analysis of ROI of like a grad program. So I didn't totally get good at this until grad school, when I started preparing for management consulting interviews. So these are jobs at places like McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group, and these are two of the classic prep books for these interviews. And the reason why they like to hire like science PhDs from top schools is because they have these like analytical skills that are super valuable, and these books are really just sort of walking you through like how you can apply that to real life business situations, and be super rigorous about decision making processes in business or daily life. And big businesses will pay these firms, tons and tons of money to have people like you who have engineering skill set just apply these analytical skills to their business problems. So if you're going to do it in class or for work, you should definitely do it for your own decisions, right? And I would challenge you to even do this for what you're doing right now, which is school. But I'll talk about more of that later. Will knows my views on higher education. And let's see. My third is be suspicious whenever be suspicious in general and skeptical. I'm a very skeptical person, and when throughout your life people are gonna try to get you excited about something. Like out of school, when you're applying for jobs, people at these companies are going to try to recruit you to come work at their firm, right? And or if you go to grad school, the professors will try to convince you to join your lab and to come to grad school. If someone's trying to like get you excited about a vision, or get you hyped on kind of like the mystique or brand value of a place, then you should really be worried. And the reason is, if you come, like coming out of school, or for me grad school, right, like there's a certain market value to get someone like me or someone with your skill set coming out of ASU as an engineer to work on something. And let's say it's like $100,000 to be someone straight out of school in San Francisco as a software engineer. if someone's trying to sell you, get you really excited about working at a place, odds are they're probably trying to pay you less than that. And uh, you should just be wary of that, and understand that often you might be disappointed. Like Harvard had a lot of mystique, and but the reality in the day to day is just kind of like drudgery and work, like any student life anywhere else, right? Um, so yeah, just be aware of this, and know that, and don't drink the Kool-Aid, and be rely on the previous heuristic of be rational, scientific, and don't rely on your emotions about except being excited to work at X company or go to X school. You should really focus on the data and the fundamentals, and not the story someone's telling you. This one I stole from Peter Thiel, who is a famous investor in PayPal and Facebook. So he has this thing about looking for secrets, which I think is really good advice. When he interviews people, he asks them this question: what's something you know to be true that very few other people would agree with you on? And if you have a good answer to this question, what that means is that you're onto something, right? So my answer to this question is, I think like higher education is a huge bubble, and and generally is, I mean, like tuitions are insane compared to the ROI for the degrees. And I think that's something that's not right. Like you would never hear like a politician say school isn't worth it, or like you shouldn't pay. There's some value you shouldn't be willing to pay for a college education. But the fact is, like, there is some dollar amount when it's just not worth it, right? Um, and so if you have something like this, and you can really convince yourself that you're right and everyone else is wrong, then there's like a great opportunity. Maybe it's not an opportunity for a startup, or maybe it could be the basis of something you're really passionate about. Like I I'm so convinced of my secret about education that even if there's not like a startup in it I'm working on, it's like this problem I'm really passionate about, right? Because I've like convinced myself that I'm right, and I really do think I'm right, and I have like data and logic behind me. And if you have something like that, it's a great place to look for passion and motivation and opportunity. So this is a great book that talks about this and some of Peter Thiel's other ideas. But when you're thinking about what you want to work on and what you're passionate about and where the opportunities are, this is a great question to ask yourself and think about. And then the last one is just to know yourself. um, so I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but everyone's different, right? Everyone values different things and has their own preferences and goals. And the great thing about knowing yourself and being honest to yourself about it is that you can't be wrong, right? Like if someone ever tries to tell you your preferences are wrong, that's impossible, right? Like your preferences are your preferences and your values. But it's really important to know them, and to know them early, because once you know them, you can really sort of back out of them and engineer your life towards some sort of optimal solution that satisfies your values, preferences, and goals, right? Um, so a great book about this is Designing Your Life. Um, this is by, I think, a couple like Stanford design school professors, but they're really good about, they walk you through some exercises where you sort of find what your own values and preferences are, and then they help you think really analytically about how you can plan your career and your life to satisfy them, right? And especially in college, like this was true of me, right? Like everyone sort of graduates and flocks to certain jobs, and there's a lot of groupthink. And you shouldn't be distracted by that, right? Like just because everyone wants to go work 80 hours a week on Wall Street, um, if you value things other than just your career and money, right, that's maybe not the best choice for you. And this other book I really love is called The Case Against Education, and this is by an economist from George Mason University, who is someone else who's in on my secret about how I think we should be skeptical of the higher education system. But the reason I put it on this slide is because he does a really good job of like being an economist and putting a price on things that aren't for sale in a market, right? So if you want to be really analytical and quantitative about your values and preferences, you need to put some sort of number on them, some sort of dollar number. And so an example of this is, California is a very expensive place to live, but people love being close to the ocean and the weather and the mountains, right? But I could live in Texas for like $50,000 less. So to make a rational decision here about the trade-offs, I really need to put a dollar amount on how much I value living by the ocean and good weather and being able to drive to the mountains on the weekend. If it's less than, right, if it's like $50,000, then I guess I'm better off living in California. But if it's less than that, you're better off living in Texas. And maybe even you're saving so much money in Texas, you could fly to California and ski every other weekend or whatever. But right, like the ability to be really rational and analytical about this comes from this economist skill set of being able to put prices on things that aren't market goods. All right, those were my heuristics, and that's my story. Will, what should I do next? Should I go to Q&A, or you just want to talk here?
So I shared a Google Doc with a bunch of you. Not many people put questions on it, which is fine, but a couple of you did. So yeah, I know the couple of you that did ask questions. If you want to like ask them now, so like everyone can get an answer, that would be good. Or if you're, someone else who has just come up with a question, like, now's your time. So just, like unmute yourself and go ahead, whoever wants to.
I was just curious if we were going to get a link to the slides in case we wanted to look back at some of those book recommendations or anything.
Yeah, I can post the slides on Canvas after class.
Cool. Thank you.
What sort of pitfalls did you encounter early on in your education, and how do you think we as young freshmen can avoid that?
Pitfalls encountered early on. I mean, I think that, you really have to learn how like adjusting from high school to college, first of all, was a big adjustment, right? It's a very different workflow, and just learning how you learn, honestly, is really important. Like I'm not a good audio learner. I can't pay attention in a lecture. So eventually I realized that was just a waste of time for me, right? So I would read the textbook and read the notes and look at the slides, but there wasn't much value for me sitting through class. And your parents would probably say, like, if you don't go to class, you're being lazy. But really, if it's up to you to know yourself and learn how you learn and how you're going to be successful. And I don't remember anything from most of my classes. Like if I was asked on the job to do something from memory, like almost none of it I would remember how to do, right? But like I at least learned how to learn, and I kind of know where to find the information I need. So if I had to, I could like quickly pull up the Wikipedia page and like work through it again. And it's important for you all to at least like learn that process for yourself, right? Because that's really what it's like on the job, is being able to kind of relearn things quickly or learn something new and apply it. And other pitfalls, I think just like knowing, I started out pre-med, and so like not being being okay with like again, knowing myself and like what my preferences and values were, and like dropping out of pre-med wasn't a failure, right? It just like wasn't what I wanted to do. So you should like get out of that mindset, and whatever sort of values your parents have instilled in you about what you should do for your career, and really just understand what it is that like you value in life and what you find fulfilling to do.
I had a question for you, sir. How
Mhm.
much of the information that you actually learned in college was applicable to your work? Like, is it mostly the stuff you learn at work, or is it like the stuff that you learn at college is then applied to your current job?
Yeah, I mean, like specific subject matter stuff, right? Like my PhD was like neurotechnology. Like I do not work on neurotechnology um, at Google X, at least not on a daily basis. But I think like I'm just really I guess like technically um, confident, and I kind of like know. I think the main value I got out of all the years of school and grad school was like, like I like took classes with like Nobel laureates at Harvard, right? And so I saw like what that level of expertise looks like, and it doesn't get any better. And if they're just normal people, they make mistakes and say stupid things too that are wrong. And so I think for me personally, like until I'd had that experience, like I was always kind of second guessing my own technical skills. And but now that I've had that, like I just kind of like know what that level of expertise looks like. And so when I'm meeting with a startup and they're trying to like pitch me on some new technology, right? Like I know what the questions are to ask, and I've like seen enough fields, technical fields that like it's not like I have to work out and solve a problem in those meetings, but I at least like know what the big issues are for all these technologies and in all the different fields, right? So I can ask like good questions and sort of quickly get to the core issues. Is that it? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yep.
Is it possible if I can ask like a follow-up question?
Sure.
So you were talking about like don't trust people, when you're fresh out of college trying to sell you things like money-wise, job-wise. Have you ever experienced that, someone doing to you? Like when you graduated from Harvard with your PhD, someone like came up to you and tried to lure you in for a lower pay, and you did your research and you found out that wasn't the correct value he was giving you?
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk is famous for this. Like all of his companies, SpaceX, Neuralink, Tesla. I mean, his main skill is being a motivator of young engineers, right? So his companies pay below market significantly, and so I was recruited to work at Neuralink, his like neural technology company, right? And the offer is way lower than what I should have been getting in the Valley, but he tries to motivate you by selling you on this vision, right? Which he's amazing at. Like he gets everyone, not just his employees, but everyone excited about colonizing Mars and like putting chips in your brain. And if you're idealistic and it's easy to get seduced by that and end up working for less than you're actually worth. And it's okay if you end up deciding to do that, right? But you should at least be like aware of this sacrifice that you're taking to pursue this vision.
Right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your.
I have a question. So it's probably like different right now because of quarantine and everything, but like what is a normal like day in the life for you, like when you're working, I guess?
Yeah, now it's just like a normal day in your life. Like I take Zoom calls all day, but at Google, right? Google has like the crazy offices with all these perks. So I lived in San Francisco, and most of the young people live in the city, and then they have these huge campuses like 30 miles south. So I had like a 90-minute commute on a Google bus to work every day, 90 minutes each way. So I would go into work, eat a huge free breakfast, then do mostly desk work, and then go to meetings. For my particular job, I might meet with a few startups, and they would sort of give us like a presentation, and I would sort of ask questions and vet the technologies, and then we might have meetings internally to discuss and see if there was something there. I might have a lot of calls with like academics or professors who we have as advisors, and a lot of times it's just like desk research, like running some basic numbers on an idea, which might be financials or technical. And then a lot of pitching. So like making sort of like being a startup, there's an internal process for getting funding for a project. So it's yeah, almost all like desk research, to the extent that we do like really hard engineering stuff like programming and or like circuit design and stuff. We either outsource it or you know, we have a lot of like interns who do, so you know, I've kind of aged out of a lot of this in my time at Google, but you know, some people do definitely do that work.
A follow-up with that, like when you said about interns, I know like people always talk about like how they have college internships and stuff, but I don't know if you would know, but do you know like what level they start taking those internships at least for like Google?
Yeah, they definitely have, you know, college internships for you know, summer internships for all ages. I specifically work at Google X, which is technically a separate company owned by Alphabet. Um, and they tend to mostly have interns who are like grad students just because of the type of work we do. But yeah, I mean, there's a huge Google, you know, college student internship page that has a ton of opportunities you should check out.
Tom, do you want to tell them a little bit more about like what exactly Google X is and like how it's different from like Google itself? I feel like not a lot of people have heard of it.
Oh yeah, Google X. Yeah, so Google, what you think of as Google is actually called Alphabet now, and that's a big public company that owns Google, and it owns a bunch of other companies like Verily and Waymo and Google X and a bunch of others that you've probably never heard of. But Google makes almost all of its money from search and advertising revenue, and I think they make like $150 billion a year from search. It's a huge amount of money, right? And they really want to diversify and invest that money into other technologies so that they have more diverse and continue to grow outside of search. So Google X's mission is to take that money from search and try to invest it in like really high risk, high reward technologies that could be the bases of new companies for Alphabet. And they call them moonshots, just, you know, in reference to like the high risk, high reward Apollo program to go to the moon. And so, yeah, some examples. We basically try to build new companies that would be significant in the scale of Google search revenue. So let's say I have a great idea to start a company that would generate like $500 million in revenue per year. Like, sounds pretty good, right? But that's like less than 1% of Google search revenue. So it's not really satisfying Google's growth needs. So they actually wouldn't invest in something like that. They really would only invest in really huge opportunities. So it's really a challenge to find things that could be that big of a opportunity to be interesting to Google. And they also really like to invest in things that are mostly technical, just because that's what Google's good at, right? So they're really good at ML and AI, and they have great engineers. You know, for an example, something we wouldn't invest in, like we wouldn't build like a social media network, right? Because everyone knows you could build a website that does social networking. So like there's not really any tech risk or tech innovation there. It's mostly like business model development and execution. Something we would invest in, which is just like a crazy example, is like a space elevator, right? Like that's, if you could build that, it would be like an obviously huge business, or but it's all technical risk. So like that's the type of thing that Google X would think about. And Waymo is probably our most famous example. The self-driving car company that is now owned by Google, like that was incubated within X, and the premise there was like, well, we don't know exactly how you would make a ton of money from self-driving cars and what the business model would be, but if you could build that, like it would obviously be worth, you know, a ton of money. And so now Waymo is its own independent company owned by Alphabet. It graduated from X.
Does anybody else have any questions? We still have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah. So I have next to no experience with computer science outside of this major. So what's kind of a direction or really a resource that you really think would kind of help somebody who's kind of a novice at all this stuff?
Mm, I mean, let's see. Maybe, I mean, the first thing is, you know, the coding interview for like software engineering roles at tech companies is like pretty similar everywhere. And just like I linked these books that are the standard for management consulting, there are standard books for coding interviews. And so there's something, one of them is called Cracking the Coding Interview. It's like this big green book. So I mean, you'll like if your goal is to go straight into a software engineering role at a tech company or startup, I mean, I think you should just get the book as soon as possible and make sure that, I mean, it's never too early to start going through and doing the coding exercises and making sure that, you know, you can look at the index and you can make sure that on basically everything in the book is on your curriculum while you're an undergraduate. And if it is, then you're definitely on you know, a good trajectory to get a starting job at a tech company as a software engineer. Um, there, you know, there are a lot of different roles within tech. Like um, there are like software engineers. They're what we call PGMs, which are like program managers. So these are people who sort of handle a lot of operations work and are very organized and sort of action oriented type A people. They're product managers who are sort of like CEOs of a specific project, you know, and they have a specific vision for what that product will look like, and they think about the tech side and the business side. There are technical product managers who are usually work with a product manager and oversee more of the software engineers. If you have a PhD in physics or computer science, you might often get hired into a research scientist role. So instead of like building a website or database, you might focus more on modeling, like AI and machine learning. So I think just like, you know, it's never too early to look at job boards and you can look at the titles and the descriptions and what the qualifications are and look at LinkedIn and see like what do people, what kind of background do people have who have these roles? And then, you know, just start planning towards that based on what ones are most interesting to you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for like one more. So if anyone has like one last, one last question, this is like your last chance.
So are you currently staying in the Boston area or?
I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, where Will and I grew up, and
Oh,
just
shoot. That's pretty cool.
working totally remote from the office in California.
I was wondering if you've ever dealt with imposter syndrome throughout your life or career, and I guess like how like either like you've overcome it or like how you've dealt with it.
Yeah, I think I touched on this a little bit about, I mean, coming out of undergrad, I realize now like I was very technically strong, right? And I knew a lot, but I just, until I went to grad school and got a terminal degree from like a top program and interacted with some of like the, you know, Nobel laureates and like absolute smartest people around. It wasn't until I did that that I really like convinced myself that I, you know, was actually qualified and had really strong technical skills. I mean, so I wouldn't recommend that because that was a lot of work just to kind of like reassure myself. But, you know, I think you just get it from experience and, you know, finding good mentors who can give you feedback is really, really important. Like I have a great boss who really does a great job giving me feedback and relying on peers who are really strong. And, you know, a lot of my friends from college and grad school, we talk all the time about work. And if we work together, right, those are people I can rely on to give me like feedback and sort of use to gauge myself. Um, so yeah, I think just having like, it's really important to establish feedback cycles for yourself so that you know, you're not just sort of guessing at where your performance is, but you're able to like put data points behind it from people who actually know your work. And for me, like if I am in a situation where I'm especially lacking confidence or feeling maybe like an imposter, like I get confidence from preparation, right? Like your performance is some function of like your raw intelligence or abilities and like how much you've prepared and learned, right? So if you're worried, if you feel like you're an imposter in some situation, just like go extra on the preparation and really do your homework. And then slowly, you know, I think everyone gets comfortable and you can overcome it.
Okay. I think we're out of time. So I'll see you all next Friday. Okay.
Cheers. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Will. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.